There's a kind of strength almost no one notices because it makes no noise. It's the strength of someone who doesn't react, of someone who doesn't lose their center under pressure, of someone who stays clear while everyone else panics. Most people believe emotional self-control means suppressing feelings, thinking positive, or taking a deep breath when something goes wrong. But that never works for long. Because what throws you off balance isn't the emotion, it's at the exact point where you identify with it. Look closely. Two people face the same situation, the same criticism, the same pressure, the same chaos. One loses control, the other stays grounded. The difference isn't personality, it isn't intelligence, it isn't experience. It's one internal thing. Almost no one is taught to notice, let alone master. And when you learn to control that specific point, something changes for good. Nothing drags you into impulsive reactions anymore. Nothing hijacks your clarity. Nothing makes you say or do things you regret later. In this video, you'll understand what that point is, why it decides whether you'll live reactive or unshakable, and how to train it in a practical, quiet, real way, even in a chaotic, fast-paced, high-pressure world. This isn't motivation. It isn't a surface-level technique. It's self-control at its deepest level, and once it stabilizes, nothing shakes you anymore. Topic 1. The mistake that makes everything shake you. Most people believe they lose control because they feel too much. Too much anger, too much anxiety, too much fear. So they spend their lives trying to control emotions, as if emotions were the problem. But they're not. Emotions arise on their own. They always have. The mistake begins when someone believes they must fight them, eliminate them, or replace them with better thoughts. That internal war drains more energy than the external situation itself. Others try to control the environment, avoid conflict, escape pressure, organize everything so they're never challenged. But the moment something goes off script, a criticism, a delay, a wrong tone of voice, everything collapses. Because the real world doesn't respect anyone's mental comfort. There's a third group too, those who try to control the mind by thinking more, analyzing everything, anticipating scenarios, rehearsing imaginary conversations so they're never caught off guard. And that's exactly where instability grows stronger. The more someone tries to control thoughts, emotions, or situations, the more dependent they become on them to feel okay. The result is predictable. Any pressure becomes a threat, any discomfort becomes urgent, any stimulus becomes a reaction. But here's something curious. Some people don't control emotions, they don't control thoughts, they don't control the world, and yet, nothing seems to knock them off balance. That's because they're not trying to control by what shows up inside them. They've learned to master something far more subtle. And that's exactly what almost no one notices. Topic 2. The invisible point between stimulus and reaction. Whenever something happens, there's a tiny moment almost no one sees, a microscopic space between the external stimulus and the internal response, a passive-aggressive message, an unexpected criticism, sudden pressure. Before anger, anxiety, or fear explode, there's a silent instant. Most people don't see this point, and that's where everything is decided. To automatic reflex. Feel, react, think, act. That interval is so fast it feels like it doesn't exist, but it's always there. And whoever learns to perceive it gains something rare. Choice. This point isn't emotion, it isn't thought. It's the automatic internal response to discomfort. The exact moment the mind decides whether it will contract or stay open. When this space is short, They speak before understanding, act before seeing clearly, regret it later. When this space expands, something profound changes. Emotion still arises. Discomfort still shows up. But it doesn't take over. That's why some people seem cold, but they're not. Others seem calm, but inside they're at war. Real stability doesn't come from the absence of emotion. It comes from the co-ability to remain present in that interval without escaping it. And here's the most important part. This space isn't a talent. It's trainable. But without realizing it, most people spend all day training the opposite. Shortening that interval, reinforcing immediate reaction. And endure. Topic 3. How you trained your mind to lose control. No one wakes up one day and decides to be reactive. That's trained. Quietly. Every day. Every time you avoid a small discomfort, every time you respond immediately to a notification, it shrinks a little more. Every time you feel something unpleasant and rush to distract yourself, it almost disappears. The problem isn't the stimulus, it's the conditioning. The modern mind was trained not to stay. Not to stay with boredom. Not to stay with frustration. Not to stay with uncertainty. Whenever something feels uncomfortable, there's an instant escape. The phone, food, mental justification, complaining, and without noticing, you teach your brain a dangerous rule. Discomfort must be eliminated immediately. Over time, any pressure feels like a threat. Any criticism feels like an attack. Any waiting feels irritating. The irony is that all of this feels normal, because everyone does it. But normal doesn't mean healthy. It just means common. This invisible training creates a mind that reacts before observing, defends before understanding, speaks before thinking. And the faster the world gets, the shorter this interval becomes, until the point where the person no longer knows where the stimulus ends and where the reaction begins. But here's the quiet shift. The same process that shortened this space can now rebuild it. With the same repetition, with the same consistency. The difference is that now, the training won't be escaping discomfort, it will be staying with it. And that changes the entire game. Or topic 4, the psychological principle that changes everything. There's a simple principle that separates the stable from the reactive, and precisely because it's simple, almost no one takes it seriously. It's not about controlling what you feel, not about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, not about rationally convincing yourself that everything is fine. The principle is different. Observe without reacting. That means allowing the emotion to arise, without pushing it away, without justifying it, without acting from it. The ordinary mind works like this. Feel something, interpret, react. It happens so fast it feels like one thing. When you observe without reacting, that flow breaks. The emotion still appears, but it finds no fuel. It doesn't turn into a story. It doesn't turn into impulse. It doesn't turn into rash action. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Because the mind was trained to discharge tension immediately, speak, complain, distract, defend. When you do none of that, a strange feeling appears, as if something were unfinished. And that's exactly where the training happens. Every time you feel the urge to react and choose to simply observe, that internal interval expands. Little by little, something shifts. Emotions lose urgency. Thoughts lose authority. The body stops running your decisions. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. And the more you practice this silent observation, the more you realize something fundamental. Discomfort isn't dangerous. It only feels intense when you run from it. But understanding this principle doesn't transform anyone. Only consistent practice does. And this is exactly where most people stop. because the next step demands something the ego really doesn't like. Reactive, Topic 5. The daily training that builds real self-control. The training that creates real self-control isn't complex. In fact, it seems too simple to take seriously. And maybe that's why it works so well. The training is this: consciously expose yourself to discomfort without reacting. Every day. Not in extreme situations, not in major crises, but in small moments that usually go unnoticed. A slow line, a comment that irritates you, the urge to respond immediately, the impulse to grab your phone for no reason. In those moments, the training isn't to endure, it's to observe. Observe the tension in the body, the tightness in the chest, the mental rush, the urge to escape, and do nothing with it. Don't justify, don't explain, don't discharge, just stay present. At first, it feels useless. The mind says you're wasting time, that this solves nothing, that reacting would be more efficient. But something happens with repetition. The body learns that discomfort passes on its own. The mind realizes it doesn't need to intervene, and that invisible interval starts to stretch. This training can be done anywhere, at work, at home, in difficult conversations, on exhausting days. And because it doesn't depend on ideal conditions, it lasts. It's not an exercise you do, it's a posture you adopt. And over time, that posture becomes automatic. But there's one important detail here, and it's exactly this detail that makes most people quit before seeing results. Topic 6. Why the mind hates this training. The mind doesn't hate this training because it's hard. It hates it because it takes control away from it. For years, the mind was conditioned to believe that reacting is acting, that responding quickly is intelligence, that discharging emotion is necessary. When you choose to observe without reacting, the mind goes on alert. It feels like it's losing territory. Restlessness appears, impatience, a nearly physical need to do something. This is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They think they're doing something wrong, that the training isn't working. But that discomfort is the clearest sign that it is working. The ego feeds on reaction. It needs to comment, explain, defend, justify. When you do none of that, the ego feels threatened, and it starts creating arguments to pull you out of the training. This is passivity. You're bottling everything up. People will walk all over you. None of that is true. Observing without reacting isn't accepting injustice. It's not staying silent forever. It's delaying reaction until clarity returns. And when clarity returns, the response is different. Sharper, shorter, firmer. Over time, something curious happens. The mind starts to relax, because it realizes it no longer needs to panic to protect you. That's the moment when self-control stops being effort and starts becoming a state. But when that happens, an unexpected effect shows up. An effect few people are ready to deal with. None. Topic 7. The side effect. Clarity under chaos. When the impulse to react starts to disappear, something changes in how you perceive the world. It's not that problems vanish, they're still there. The difference is that when they no longer pull you into them. In chaotic environments, most people synchronize with the chaos. They speak louder, think faster, act with urgency. Those who develop self-control do the opposite. The mind slows down while everything accelerates around it, and that creates a silent advantage. Clarity appears exactly when others lose it. While some react, you observe. While some defend, you understand. While some talk too much, you choose the right moment. This clarity doesn't come from better thinking. It comes from the absence of constant emotional interference. The mind isn't busy justifying, protecting, or explaining itself. In real pressure situations, a hard conversation, an unexpected demand, an important decision, this becomes obvious. Responses become shorter, more direct, not more because effective. You impose presence, and people notice, because you don't lose presence. Interestingly, this changes the dynamics around you. Conflicts dissolve faster. Arguments lose momentum. Provocations find no return. It's not control over others. It's control over the only point that was always within your reach. But this state isn't the end of the process. It's just the sign that something deeper is settling. Because when clarity becomes consistent, a stability appears that no longer depends on effort. Here we are. Topic 8. When nothing pulls you off center. There's a moment when self-control stops being something you do and becomes something you are. At that point, you no longer need to remember to observe. You no longer need to try not to react. The center stays stable by default. Situations still happen. People still test limits. Unexpected things still arise. Something has shifted. Discomfort appears and finds space. Pressure shows up and finds structure. Chaos knocks and finds no opening. Not because you became indifferent, but because there's no immediate identification anymore. You feel, but you don't get lost. You perceive, but you don't merge. You act, but you're not dragged. That's the difference between someone who controls themselves and someone who operates from the center. At this stage, self-control doesn't come from constant vigilance. It comes from internal alignment. Responses naturally become slower, firmer, more precise. And the most interesting part is that this doesn't create rigidity. It creates flexibility. Because when you don't react impulsively, you can choose when to be firm, when to be silent, when to advance, and when to step back. This state is described in many traditions in different ways. But deep down, they all point to the same thing. A mind that remains stable regardless of external movement. And when someone gets here, they realize something important. The world was never the problem. The problem was losing the center every time something touched a sensitive point. When that center consolidates, there's no more constant inner struggle, no unnecessary wear, no regret after reacting, just presence and action when it's actually necessary. Which brings us to the inevitable closing of everything you've heard so far. Or what you do with this now. Everything said here can be reduced to one simple truth. You don't lose control because the world is chaotic. You lose control because you automatically react to discomfort. And as long as that reaction is unconscious, it doesn't matter how much you understand emotions, how many books you read, or how many techniques you know. Something will always knock you off balance. Real self-control isn't rigidity. It isn't coldness. It isn't becoming immune to life. It's the ability to stay present at the exact moment the mind wants to escape. That's the point, the only point. And starting today, you can train it in a concrete way. Not tomorrow, not when everything is calm, but today, in small situations. The next time you feel the urge to react immediately, the next time discomfort arises, stay. The next time the mind demands emotional discharge, don't give it. This training doesn't draw attention, it doesn't get applause, but it builds something rare, a mind that isn't hijacked by the environment, and that changes everything. Ask yourself, in which situations do I lose my center most often? What always triggers my automatic reaction? What would happen if, for a few seconds, I didn't react? These aren't theoretical questions, they're invitations to practice. If this video helped you see something you hadn't noticed before, consider subscribing to the channel. Turn on notifications. Here, The goal isn't motivation. It's training the mind to function with clarity in the real world. And if you want, leave a comment. What situation tests your self-control the most right now? Because when you learn to master this internal point, the world can stay chaotic, but you don't. And if you notice something important today, you'll understand even more in the next video. Because self-control keeps you stable, but discipline is what keeps you moving, even when there's no motivation, energy, or desire. In the next video, I'll show you one specific mental rule that once understood makes discipline stop being effort and become inevitable. The video is called, "This mental rule makes discipline inevitable." If you struggle with consistency, if you start strong and quit halfway, or if you feel too dependent on your mood, this next video completes the cycle we started here. So if you're not subscribed yet, now is the moment. Because when self-control and discipline come together, the mind stops oscillating and starts operating with precision. See you in the next video.